In 1906, San Francisco was a city on the rise, with a population of around 400,000. It had become one of the most important centers of commerce, finance, shipping, and transportation on the American West Coast. Its streets were crowded with wooden houses, brick buildings, hotels, banks, shops, commercial blocks, and streetcars, connecting different parts of the city. But beneath those streets was another world: gas lines, water mains, telephone lines, and countless other systems that kept the city running. On the surface, everything appeared normal, until the early morning of April 18, 1906. At 5:12 a.m., the ground began to shake. The first strong tremors were followed roughly 20 to 25 seconds later by the main rupture. It began just offshore from San Francisco, and then raced along the San Andreas Fault. The earthquake is now estimated at approximately magnitude 7.9. The rupture extended for roughly 477 kilometers, from near San Juan Bautista in the south to Cape Mendocino in the north. The strongest shaking lasted for roughly 45 to 60 seconds. 40 seconds may sound like a brief moment, but in a city of hundreds of thousands of people, packed with buildings, streets, and vital infrastructure, 40 seconds was long enough to change San Francisco forever. And what came next would make the disaster even worse. Fire was about to spread across the city, and this time, San Francisco might not have enough water to stop it. This is the story of the Great San Francisco Earthquake and Fire of 1906. If you enjoy stories of history, tragedy, and real events that changed the world, welcome to Missing History. Let's uncover the past, one story at a time. A city that already knew the earth could shake. The people living around San Francisco Bay were not strangers to earthquakes. In 1838, a major earthquake struck the San Francisco Bay region. It is believed to have been associated with the San Andreas Fault. The damage extended from San Francisco southward, through the Santa Clara Valley, near San Jose, and toward Monterey. Then, 30 years later, in 1868, another major earthquake struck the region. This time, the earthquake was associated with the Hayward Fault. San Francisco suffered damage. Brick buildings were damaged, walls collapsed, chimneys fell, heavy architectural elements came crashing down. So people in San Francisco already knew that earthquakes were a real danger. What they did not know was something far more difficult. When would the next great earthquake come? At the beginning of the 20th century, science had no reliable way to predict the exact day, time, or magnitude of a major earthquake. And so the city continued to grow. By the early 1900s, San Francisco contained large numbers of wooden houses, brick buildings, and massive commercial structures. Earthquake engineering was still nowhere near where it is today. Many brick buildings were extremely heavy. When the ground moved violently from side to side, walls and heavy architectural elements could separate from the buildings and collapse. Some wooden buildings could actually withstand shaking better than their heavier brick counterparts. But wood had another weakness: it burned. And another vulnerability was hidden beneath the streets. San Francisco depended on extensive networks of water pipes, gas lines, and communication systems. Gas was widely used for lighting, cooking, and heating. If an earthquake damaged a gas line, gas could escape. And if the water system was damaged at the same time, firefighters could face a nightmare. There could be fires everywhere, but not enough water to fight them. These weaknesses were already built into the city. Then, at 5:12 a.m. on April 18, 1906, everything was about to be tested at once. The 40 seconds that changed the city. The earthquake did not begin in downtown San Francisco. The rupture started approximately 3 kilometers offshore, west of the city. From there, it propagated along the San Andreas Fault for roughly 480 kilometers. An enormous amount of stored energy was suddenly released. Seismic waves spread across a vast area. The shaking was felt from southern Oregon all the way to Los Angeles. Communities throughout California were affected. Santa Rosa suffered severe damage. San Jose was also badly affected, but San Francisco was particularly vulnerable because it was close to the rupture zone. There was another factor that made the destruction vary dramatically from one neighborhood to another: the ground itself. Some parts of the city were built on relatively firm ground. Others stood on soft sediment or land that had been artificially filled. When an earthquake strikes, certain types of ground can amplify the shaking. Some areas can settle. In others, the soil can lose much of its strength and behave almost like a liquid. This phenomenon is known as liquefaction. Buildings can tilt, foundations can shift, structures can collapse, and across the city, people who had been asleep only moments earlier suddenly found themselves in the middle of chaos. Imagine waking up to find your entire house shaking violently. Objects falling from shelves, glass breaking, walls moving. The sound of buildings collapsing around you, chimneys crashing from rooftops, bricks and debris covering the streets. And when the shaking finally stopped, San Francisco was no longer the same city. Streets were filled with rubble. Streetcar routes were damaged. Many buildings were unsafe, and essential systems throughout the city had been severely disrupted. But the earthquake was only the beginning. When the earthquake opened the way for fire, the earthquake damaged buildings, cracked streets, and disrupted the city's infrastructure. And almost immediately, fires began breaking out across San Francisco. Approximately 30 fires were reported in the period following the earthquake. Some were caused by broken gas lines. Others were caused by damaged equipment and systems inside buildings. When leaking gas met a spark or another source of heat, it could ignite. San Francisco depended heavily on gas systems at the time. When underground pipes broke, gas could escape into buildings and onto the streets. But there was another problem, one that would prove just as serious: water. The earthquake severely damaged water pipes supplying the city, as well as pipes within the city itself. Pipes broke, connections failed, and many fire hydrants could not provide enough water or pressure for effective firefighting. That created a terrifying situation. The fires were increasing while the system needed to stop them was failing at the same time. Firefighters were fighting fires that were spreading through the city, but they did not have enough water, and many streets were blocked by debris from damaged buildings. What began as dozens of separate fires gradually became something much larger, a city-wide fire disaster. The flames spread from one building to the next. Wooden buildings became fuel. Damaged structures allowed flames to penetrate deeper into buildings, and wind carried heat and fire toward neighboring structures. As fires from different parts of the city began to merge, the situation became harder to control. With every passing hour, the fire continued for approximately 3 days. More than 500 city blocks were destroyed. San Francisco was no longer fighting a series of isolated fires. The entire city was now fighting for survival. Fighting fire without enough water. In the early hours of the disaster, firefighters continued to battle fires throughout the city, but the lack of water was only part of the problem. Some fire stations and communication systems had been damaged. Streets were blocked by collapsed buildings. Firefighters had to work through smoke, intense heat, and structures that could collapse without warning. The U.S. military forces stationed at the Presidio and Fort Mason also became heavily involved in controlling the emergency. One of the methods used to slow the fire was the creation of fire breaks. The principle was simple. If the flames could not be stopped with water, then firefighters had to remove the fuel in front of them. Buildings were demolished to create open spaces between the advancing fire and areas that had not yet burned. Dynamite was also used, but early attempts were not always successful. Explosions could damage surrounding buildings, and debris from demolished structures could sometimes become additional fuel for the flames. So destroying buildings did not guarantee that the fire would stop. Still, as the flames continued to advance, officials had to make decisions under enormous pressure. One of the most important defensive lines was Van Ness Avenue. The broad avenue ran north to south through the city and became a major line of defense. Officials attempted to stop the flames from moving westward from the areas that had already burned. Buildings were demolished to create open space. It was an extraordinary decision. Some of those buildings had not even caught fire yet. But the city was facing a fire that conventional firefighting could not control. There was no perfect solution, only decisions that might reduce the destruction. As the second day began, changing winds affected the direction of the flames. Military forces also attempted to draw water from San Francisco Bay to support firefighting operations outside the main fire zone. To the south, firefighters and volunteers worked to prevent the flames from reaching the Mission District, where large numbers of homes and residents were concentrated. Meanwhile, people began fleeing the areas threatened by the fire. The streets filled with pedestrians, horse-drawn carriages, wagons, families carrying whatever possessions they could save. Smoke filled the air. Heat surrounded the streets. Buildings continued to collapse, and the city kept burning. By April 21, 1906, the major spread of the fire had finally been brought under control. This did not happen because of one single solution. It was the result of many factors working together. Fire breaks, the demolition of buildings, water drawn from the bay, firefighting efforts across the city, and changing wind conditions. As the smoke slowly began to clear, the scale of the destruction became visible. San Francisco had been devastated. A city after the fire. The numbers tell the story. Approximately 4.7 square miles, or about 12 square kilometers, had been burned. Around 28,000 buildings had been destroyed. They included wooden structures, as well as brick buildings. Approximately 225,000 people were left without homes, and modern estimates place the death toll at more than 3,000 people. The early estimates had been much lower, but once the fires were under control, the city's greatest challenge had changed. The question was no longer, how do we stop the fire? Now it was, how do we help hundreds of thousands of people rebuild their lives? Many residents left San Francisco, but many others remained. Temporary camps were established in parks, military areas, and other parts of the city where people could find shelter. The military played an important role in organizing and managing relief camps. Tents were arranged in orderly rows. Food was distributed, water, clothing, and other essential supplies. Sanitation was also organized to reduce the risk of disease. Later, the city built small homes for displaced residents. They became known as earthquake shacks. Approximately 5,300 were built. For many survivors, these small cottages provided a bridge between temporary camps and a return to normal life. Many families eventually moved the cottages onto their own property and continued living in them for years. But relief was only the beginning. The city itself had to be rebuilt. Across the destroyed districts, enormous amounts of debris covered the streets. Bricks, wood, steel, glass, everything had to be cleared. Roads had to reopen. Transportation had to return. Businesses had to start operating again, and people needed to get back to work. The streetcar system was especially important. Workers and construction materials had to move through the city continuously. So transportation was restored as quickly as possible. At the same time, new buildings began rising across San Francisco. Architects, engineers, and city officials now faced a much larger question. What should the rebuilt city look like? The disaster had shown that the strength of individual buildings was only one part of the problem. Water systems, electrical systems, roads, access to different areas, construction materials, and urban planning all had to be considered together. The lessons of 1906 gradually influenced building standards and ideas about urban safety. Rebuilding was not something that could be completed in a few months. It became a process that continued for years, and within less than a decade, the skyline of San Francisco had changed dramatically. Water for the next fire. One of the clearest lessons from 1906 came from the failure of the city's water system. San Francisco could not afford to depend entirely on a single water network. If another major earthquake damaged the city's ordinary water pipes, firefighters would need another source. That idea led to the development of the Auxiliary Water Supply System, or AWSS. It was designed specifically for firefighting, and it was designed to operate separately from the city's normal water system. The system included elevated reservoirs, storage tanks, pumping stations, high-pressure water mains, underground cisterns, fire hydrants, and connections that could allow firefighters to use water from the bay and from fireboats. Construction continued for several years. The system was completed in 1913. It represented a major change in the way San Francisco prepared for disaster. In 1906, the city had been forced to fight a massive fire while its normal water system was damaged. Now, the city was developing a dedicated emergency water system, one designed specifically for a worst-case scenario. The idea was simple. If the next earthquake damaged the normal water supply, San Francisco would still have another way to fight a fire. From disaster to scientific knowledge. The story of 1906 did not end with the destruction of San Francisco. The earthquake also changed the scientific understanding of earthquakes themselves. 3 days after the earthquake, the governor of California established the State Earthquake Investigation Commission. The commission worked under the direction of Andrew Lawson. Its mission was to collect and document physical evidence from the earthquake. Scientists examined the ground. They recorded changes along the fault. They studied damaged structures, and they documented what had happened in the hours and days surrounding the disaster. The resulting investigation became an important scientific record of the earthquake. One of the key scientists involved was Harry Fielding Reid. Reid studied the changes and movements of the ground caused by the earthquake. From these observations, he developed the concept that became known as the elastic rebound theory. The theory explains that the Earth's crust can accumulate stress over long periods of time. As that stress builds, rocks along a fault can eventually rupture and move suddenly. The stored energy is released and seismic waves are generated. The theory became one of the foundations of modern understanding of earthquake mechanics. But San Francisco's story was not only about science. It was also about rebuilding. In 1915, just 9 years after the disaster, San Francisco hosted the Panama Pacific International Exposition. The International World's Fair attracted visitors from around the globe, and the city that had once been devastated by earthquake and fire was now presenting itself to the world once again. The rebuilding of San Francisco was not simply about restoring what had been destroyed. It was about creating something new from the experience. And that is the story of the San Francisco earthquake and fire of 1906, the disaster that changed San Francisco forever. Thank you for joining us on this journey through history. If you enjoyed this documentary and would like to explore more remarkable stories from the past, please consider liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and joining us again for another journey into history. Until next time, this is Missing History. Thank you for watching.